Ladies and gentlemen, moving on to our first session. This is session 1. The topic is creating socially responsible managers. And this session will discuss new programs for training and capabilities to equip managers with essential skills in social and environmental responsibility. I would like to invite Professor Datuk Dr. Muhammad Zabid, Haji Abdul Razak Prize, President and Vice Chancellor of Uni Razak, and also Dr. Nazli Noor, CEO of Malaysian Institute of Management, to lead this session. So gentlemen, you have 20 minutes, so we will begin with Professor Datuk Dr. Zabid first. You want to come and stand here, sir? Over here? Yeah. This is more comfortable. Okay then.
Okay, thank you very much, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and very good morning to all of you. Okay, I believe I have about 15 minutes to make my presentation, and then there will be Q&A, I suppose, right? Okay. Well, first, on behalf of University Tun Razak, we'd like to thank the organizers, EU and the Malaysian Chamber of Commerce. We'd also like to thank ARM and Jaya University College of Hospitality for inviting us to participate in this particular event. Well, this morning we'll be talking about creating socially responsible managers. It's a very interesting topic, a topic that I used to teach about 20 years ago. And when I was talking about this 20 years ago, people were telling me that, what the hell are you talking about? Okay, never mind. 20 years later, I'm coming back and saying some things. Now, I'd like to share with you 3 things. Number 1, about the raison d'etre, or justification, or why corporate social responsibility is important. Secondly, is to share a little bit with you about some highlights about CSR in Malaysia, some current status. And I believe I don't want to highlight too much of that, because after this and this afternoon, I understand there are many more academic papers, research findings that will be shared by some of the colleagues this afternoon about CSR in Malaysia, the current status. But more importantly, perhaps, on how do we move forward into creating more socially responsible managers in Malaysia, realizing that 2020 is only about 7.5 years, or 7 years and 3 months, or 4 months from now. Okay. Now, the raison d'etre about CSR is quite clear. I think one of the reasons why people talk about CSR is because social problems arises because of business. Without business, there may not be as many social problems. So some argue that because social problems arises out of business activities, it is only appropriate that business play the role to rectify these social problems. For example, you talk about pollution, if it is not because of companies involved in all kinds of manufacturing and also activities. All right. The same thing when you talk about employees' work safety. All right. And as you get more sophisticated methods of production with technologies, you find that all these things have got to be addressed. The second issue is that the stakeholders' demands, external stakeholders' demands, increasingly have higher expectations today than before. And because of that, I think it's only appropriate that if companies want to survive, they have to meet not all, but some of the expectations of the stakeholders. And some of the expectations are, of course, very pricey or costly to the organizations. The other reason is we also realize that CSR is becoming more important because many companies realize that it helps the company's reputation. Some people see it as trying to promote the corporate financial performance of the organization with tax incentives given by the public policy makers. So these are the areas that we find why people do business. And many people also believe that when companies are involved in socially responsible activities, this will discourage government to start new laws, new policies, because people are supposed to be socially responsible in their actions and behavior. And last but not least, the argument about why CSR is important for organizations is also because there is a need to balance between public policy makers and private policy. Public policy, they understand better about processes in the administrative systems, but the private policy makers, they have financial resources. They have other means of capabilities that may be of importance or usage to solve some of the social problems. So these are some of the reasons that we say why people are involved in those activities. What is therefore the status of CSR in Malaysia? Okay, next slide. Okay. Now, I remember one of the first few people who started research, empirical research on CSR in Malaysia was by a professor from University of Malaya. I don't know whether you remember, Professor Gregory Tong and Professor Teo. Okay, Teo was in Wollongong, I guess. But anyway, they did an empirical, the first empirical study, and this was published, I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Nazli, by MIM. I don't know whether MIM has a record of that paper. There was a special issue in 1980 about CSR in Malaysia, and it was conducted about 30 years ago, precisely, on how do Malaysian companies perceive or react towards CSR. And of course, following that paper in 1981, my colleague and we did a study. Sorry, I have to put Rashid, I have to put my father's name. Alright, we did a study in 2000 to compare how CSR has evolved, alright, from 1981 to 1991 and subsequently in the year 2001. And we found that there is actually an increasing awareness in terms of the managers' perceptions towards social responsibility. For example, the results from our study, okay, showed that in between 1991 and 2000, there was an increase, even though it's a small percentage, about 97% of the managers claim that they are involved in CSR activities. Now, of course, if you want to go into the details of it, then you will ask, what are the CSR activities that they claim? Now, if you go into it, most of the CSR activities are basically related to activities that have a direct impact to organizations. For example, product or service to consumers. Are they selling products, for example, like toys that will not be dangerous to the consumers? Product safety. Okay. The other one is like community involvement at that time. Okay. At that time, when you talk about community involvement, you're talking about giving like sports donation to schools, things like that. All right. And also some aspects. The list is actually on physical environment, but the majority was actually employees' welfare. That was the biggest claim on social responsibility of managers at that time. Never mind, whatever it is very clear that Malaysian companies are more aware and they realize the importance of this. And then, of course, there are other studies, recent studies by Rahman and Mustaruddin, latest, last year published in this journal. And they compare in terms of to what extent Malaysian companies disclose their CSR activities. And of course, under SC, disclosure is very important. And they found out that by disclosing their CSR activities, they are able to improve the financial performance and also image of organizations. So that is also quite important. And last night, I didn't have the time to compare that. I had a paper written by my friend from China Europe International Business School in Shanghai, and also some of his colleagues from Nottingham University in Malaysia. Also compared how do Malaysian CEOs, in particular, how do Malay CEOs and Chinese CEOs perceive CSR activities and how is the performance. And I don't want to disclose the details. This is in the International Journal of Cross-Cultural Management, but the results of the study by Professor Bala clearly showed that there are significant differences in terms of how do Malaysian CEOs respond to CSR activities, and also how do the Chinese CEOs respond to CSR activities. It is statistically significant from the findings. All right, and it's quite interesting. Okay, based on these findings, maybe somebody from Nottingham University will be able to share this. Professor Bala, by the way, is a Malaysian, but China Europe International Business School is a very well-known business school in Shanghai. Okay, he teaches there, by the way. All right, and I think he has a son studying in Nottingham. Okay, another point that I want to talk about is how do we move forward. Now, this is a little bit, I like to talk about history, you know, being a little bit of a history student. I think we need to understand that before we can talk about creating socially responsible managers, all right, we need to understand the evolution of CSR. And if you look at it, CSR clearly evolved in the early 19th century. And at that time, when you talk about CSR, we talk about legal obligation that you must do in terms of what the law says. And in terms of the action of these organizations, they were actually because there is a demand, so they will do it because they are asked to do. And of course, the behavior is of course very passive. Then by the time 1920s, all right, this happens in the West, in the US in particular, CSR became more and more important because of the forces of people say principles of charity and principles of stewardship. So this is where they say, you as a company, you make a lot of money, you must fulfill your moral obligation to society, and you must give. Alright? And this is also very clear, and we find that people are becoming more and more philanthropic. Now, in the words of Peter Drucker, he did once say this, and I do not know whether you like this or not. Do good to do well, or do well to do good. You figure out which is which. Do good to do well means you do good and then you become rich. Do well to do good means you become rich first and then you start throwing your riches everywhere. So, which is the chicken, which is the egg, I leave it to you to discuss, you know, later. Now, but this behavior of social responsibility is actually very reactive. There is a pressure, there is a demand, organizations react. Then come in the 1960s, where there's a guy by the name of Professor Prakash Sethi from New York University, Stern Business School. He started this idea of social responsiveness. Alright? He's no more around anyway. So for him, he says that no, we don't talk about social responsibility, we talk about social responsiveness. And what is social responsibility? He says that companies have an obligation to do, in the sense to behave in a proactive way. Because you started a problem, and if you are concerned about community, it is therefore the organization's role to become proactive in resolving social issues. That was his argument. Okay? But today, I think, we have to move forward in the new millennium. We don't talk anymore about social responsiveness, we talk about corporate citizenship. In other words, it's not about companies becoming proactive, but how do organizations work together with institutions, university, or even NGOs, and see how they can work together in an interactive manner to solve or to help some social problems. And if you remember this well-known guy who wrote this book, People at the Bottom of the Pyramid,